It's Parshas Kiseitze. It's I would say, very similar to the portion of Kedoshim in the book of Leviticus and Vayikra. A lot of mitzvahs in this week's Parsha. And so it's a lot to cover. But we don't, Baruch Hashem in class, we take one mitzvah and we tackle it. And today we're going to tackle the mitzvah of what we call in yeshiva, the mitzvah of Micah, which in proper Hebrew would be Ma'akeh. And Ma'akeh is the mitzvah of creating a fence or a guardrail around your roof. Sounds, something that the HOAs, the Karens and the HOAs would chase you around about what kind of guardrail you should have on your roof. But the truth is, leaving the government out of it, if we follow the Torah, we really don't need the government. We would function just fine, but we need everyone to follow the Torah. The Torah has very specific rules about constructing a guardrail. It's actually in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, and it's from our Parsha, and that is the third reading on page 1190. It says, Kisivna bayis chodosh, when you build a new house. Actually, I'm going to pause for a moment. I'd like to dedicate tonight's class. Tonight is the 7th of Elul. It's not the 7th of Elul in Montana yet, but tonight will be the 7th of Elul. It would have been the 100th birthday of my bubby, Esther Goldman, and I was very, very close to. You just mentioned my grandfather, but I was very, very close to my grandparents, and my bubby's birthday was what they called in Yiddish Avoch in Elul, right? The 7th of Elul means it's 1 week into Elul, so that was her birthday, and tonight she would have turned 100. She was a powerhouse. She was no one ever accused her of keeping her opinion to herself. Everyone in Crown Heights knew her, and sometimes beyond Crown Heights. She was an incredible machnes oirach. She had guests in her house, even though she worked, and she had guests in her house 24/7. She was a balabosta that served so many people, and she was an amazing bubby. And she was one of the first donors to Chabad of Montana. She helped us buy our house. And we're celebrating her birthday tonight, so I mentioned it and dedicating the class in honor of Baba Esther. The Torah says, when you build a new house, you must make a guardrail for your roof. Continues on 1193, do not allow blood to be spilled in your house when one who is destined to fall falls from your unprotected roof. So even though you could say, well, everything's hashgacha pratis, everything's divine providence. If someone went on your roof, and fell off the roof, that's their issue. God obviously wanted them to die. Otherwise, why would they fall off the roof? That's not how it works. God says we as homeowners, as building owners, have an obligation to ensure that our property is properly protected. And that's a big deal in Montana. Because in Montana, we'd like to believe, at least from the libertarian Montana perspective, that if you come onto my property without permission and you fall off my roof, you deserve what was coming. Who asked you to climb onto my roof? Have a safe trip. And for that matter, if you have a broken ladder on your property and someone picks it up and uses it without permission and they fall, the Gemara says, the Talmud says unequivocally, you're not allowed to have a broken ladder on your property. In other words, you have to remove, assuming that you know that there are hazardous things on your property, you need to make sure that your property is protected. But specifically with the roof, the Torah makes it unequivocally clear that you have to make sure that your roof is protected so that you or anyone else, obviously, that's on the roof does not go flying off the roof. What I share with you tonight going forward is from 3 different talks of the Rebbe on this particular mitzvah. And I think it makes the mitzvah that much more applicable, whether your house has a roof or not, whether you're a homeowner or not, and whether, even if your roof has a guardrail, right, let's say you'll say that you're going to stand in Shul this Shabbos and you read the parsha and you say, my house has a fence. My roof has a fence. So what does this mitzvah have to do with me? Comes along Chassidus and says, of course it has to do with you. It's never just about the physical fence. It's never just about the physical manifestation of the mitzvah. It's about how this mitzvah plays out in other parts of our life and how we protect ourselves. And to understand that, we have to ask 2 questions about the language used in the verse. In Hebrew, it says, Kisivne bayis chodosh, if you will build a new home. It seems to make pretty clear. It sounds like that the obligation to have a guardrail or a fence is only if it's a new home. But if I'm buying an old home, a used home, it's not a brand new home that I'm building, maybe not. But the truth is, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, if you look in the Code of Jewish Law, it makes it very, very clear that the mitzvah of putting up a guardrail, a fence, is also if you recently acquired an older home. that didn't have a guardrail, let's say you bought it from a non-Jew or you bought it from a Jew who doesn't follow the rules, for whatever reason the house didn't have a guardrail on the roof, which by the way, I'm not sure that it applies to the roofs. If you have a roof like mine, that's it's not meant for humans to stand on. It's not a flat roof, but the halacha is very clear that it's not just for a new home, and yet the Torah specifically uses the words bayis chodosh, a new home. Some people say, if you look in the Sifri, if you look in the Medrash, it seems to indicate that the fact that it says a new house versus a non-new house is to tell you that it's new to you. But just say that. Saying kisivne bayis chodesh, that you're going to build a new home, makes it sound like it's a new home, when clearly that's not the case. So if the halacha is that you have to have it no matter what, then why not just say that? And number two, what does it mean? If you read the English there, the translation was very odd because the Hebrew is odd too. It says the words are ki yipol hanoifel mimenu, which means when one who falls, one who's destined to fall, falls from it. He's already destined to fall. He's already falling, and then he falls from it. What kind of language is that? He's already falling? So he's falling. Why would you say, grammatically, why would you say the faller is falling? It doesn't sound right in the grammar. Chassidus goes on to explain that the Torah, someone has to mute them. There we go. The Torah, the Chassidus goes on to explain that there's a spiritual component here that is specifically important to navigate when you're building a new home, not a new house. When you're building a new home, when a new couple gets married, what is the foundation of that marriage? And what Chassidus explains is that you have the spiritual building of a home. And this is something that, I saw just recently, someone asked a Rebbitzin online, when I date, should I date for the purpose of a committed to a marriage, or should I date just for dating? Take your shoe off, please. And the Rebbitzin responded and said that what she finds in her work of relationships is that if you date without the purpose of building a life together, you end up walking around in circles not knowing what the purpose is altogether. In other words, you can date and you take as long as you need to figure out if this is the right match, but there has to be a purpose, there has to be a commitment involved in that journey, because otherwise you're all over the map. When a young couple comes together to build a home, and a young couple gets together to get married, right? My uncle famously wrote an article on Chabad.org, my uncle from South Africa, Rabbi Goldman. The article was entitled Love at Second Sight, right? Instead of Love at First Sight. Because we always talk about love at first sight. What are you talking about? That's not love. Whatever that is, that's maybe lust, it's excitement, it's physical, it's attractiveness. It ain't love. Love is when it's a commitment that's more than just in the temporary. And so when a young couple is going to get married, or a couple altogether is going to get married, they're building a new home. The first thing we have to recognize is for the husband who just, under normal circumstances, just spent 15 years in yeshiva, or 12 years in yeshiva, whether it's yeshiva ketana, the mesivta in the lower level, in the high school, and then into the rabbinical side of it, and then maybe rabbinical ordination. You just took a guy who has spent the last X amount of years in this spiritual bliss. Right? We don't have girlfriends. We're not busy with all that whole world of dating. A ganzen Tag, we're busy. Could you imagine, from the age of God knows what, they're already busy with dating, but we don't have that problem. So you take a guy like that, and now you want him to spiritually function, even though now he has to bring home, he has to feed his family, he has a wife to care for, he has to figure out how to manage and navigate a relationship. It's a very complicated reality, and it could affect spiritually as well. Actually shared with many in Chanaleah. Were you in there for that story? Or just Chanaleah about the movies?
Oh,
So I shared with them, and I know I shared it here before as well, but it's always worth repeating because it's a great story. Rabbi J.J. Hecht, Rabbi Yankiv Yehuda Hecht, Alav Shalom, was the great rabbi of the NCFGE, the National Committee for the Furtherance of Jewish Education. Did a marvelous job in the Jewish world. He had a radio show on WEVD in New York. But in the 1940s, he was the first yeshiva student in America. There was not a lot of yeshivas in America in 1943, 1944. There was Chabad, Tom Chetmim, there was Torah V'das, there was maybe one or two others. And he was the first yeshiva student in America to get a draft letter that he's being drafted to go to World War II. And it was a big scare, because if he would be accepted to be a soldier for a yeshiva student, that means all the other yeshiva students would be accepted as well, would be drafted as well. And spiritually, it was not a place for a yeshiva student. The army was not built at that time. I'm not even sure it's built at this time, but certainly not back then. It was not built to cater for kosher, Shabbos, Yom Tov. They weren't interested in beards. He gets a draft letter, and he goes with his father to the previous Chabad Rebbe, to Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, for a bracha. And he goes to the previous Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe tells him, Zol zayin b'derech hateva, may everything go according to the rules of nature. But if it has to be supernatural, let it be l'mayla b'derech hateva, let it be supernatural. So he goes to downtown Brooklyn, where all the doctors were for the U.S. Army, where he has to be inspected, doctor to doctor, and he goes to the audio out, the eye doctor and the ear doctor, and everyone says, check, 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 because he was a healthy young American boy. The last doctor was a Jewish psychiatrist. And he says to him, oh, Mr. Hecht, nice to meet you. What do you do for a living? It was a living. I'm in yeshiva. I go to yeshiva. She says, what do you do in your spare time? He says, I don't have spare time. I'm a yeshiva student. He says, do you have a girlfriend? He goes, no, I'm a yeshiva student. What kind of girlfriend? He says, do you go to the movies? He goes, I'm a yeshiva student. Of course I don't go to the movies. And after a couple of those questions, the doctor, the psychiatrist said, you know what I think? I think you're crazy. And he nixed him on the list, and he was exempt from going to the army. When he came back to 770 that day, Reb Shmuel Levittin, the mashpia, the mentor of the yeshiva, said no one should say tachnun, the special prayer that we say. You don't say it when it's a holiday, because it was like a holiday for the yeshiva students. And then he went back to the previous Rebbe with his father. The previous Rebbe said to him, Li'ois and iflois, he said it with a tune, Li'ois and iflois, that Hashem does miracles and wonders, we know. G'doilois, levadoi, but the greatness of those miracles, only Hashem really comprehends how great they really are. In other words, you don't even realize what just happened here, what kind of miracle Hashem orchestrated here. So when you take a yeshiva student like that and you say, okay, now go play house with your new wife that you met 3 months ago, now you're married, there's a very big potential that there could be a great spiritual demise for the student, for the husband. And that's why the verse refers to him as Yipal HaNoifel. He's already falling. He's falling because he already got married, which means by definition, he's going from a state of spiritual asceticism and spiritual bliss to a reality of life, which not whether it's right or wrong, just realistically, it's going to be a downsizing on his spiritual level. And that's what the Torah says. You need to protect yourself by creating that guardrail. In other words, so whether you actually have a guardrail on your roof or not, the Torah is still commanding you that the way you're going to build a proper Jewish home, and this goes for everybody. If you're going to build a proper Jewish home, you have to have principles. You have to know what your boundaries are, what you're not going to break. And everyone, it could be there could be different boundaries, different foundations for every person, but there has to be a foundation that you know is not breakable. This morning at 5 a.m., Manny and I had a long conversation because we're all with our jet lag, and this was part of the conversation. Manny is a soccer addict. He would love to go every weekend to play soccer, except it's always on Shabbos, all these travel games. And a lot of these academies where they have soccer experts where he would love to go, you have to move there, you have to be in the academy, there's no kosher, there's no Shabbos, there's no Yom Tov, it's very complicated. So how do you balance that? You have a dream, and you really are good at what you're doing, you're a great soccer player, and you're a Jew, and Hashem says, keep Shabbos. That's why we need to create principles in our lives to always know what your guardrails are, because once you go off the guard, you ever see those cliffs when you're going on the mountains? We did a couple of them in Europe this week when our big Mercedes van, so it's twice the size of a minivan, and you're going on some mountain road that has no guardrails, and you're just imagining what it looks like when you start tumbling down.
Or when you go through
the tunnels.
the house.
Oh, that's right. So you don't have a guardrail? Sure. Can you be safe? Absolutely. Is it the smartest way to live your life? No, because if you could put up a guardrail to make sure that you're safer, that you don't go flying off, that's a much better option. The Torah is not saying. The Torah knows human nature. The Torah knows the human being, that we're capable of falling off the cliff in a second, which is why the Torah says, do yourself a favor. Make a physical guardrail, but also make a spiritual guardrail. Know what your principles are and what you're not willing to break no matter what. Because if you don't know that, you'll be railroaded in a second. You'll succumb to the temptation. It's so easy, right? I always meet people that say, Rabbi, I keep kosher, right? People that come from Orthodox homes, I keep kosher, but I eat fish in non-kosher restaurants. I'm like, listen, eating fish is a lot better than eating whatever else they're serving. But I can't sit here and say with a straight face that the fish you ate in the non-kosher restaurant is kosher, because I know what pots and pans they use. And before you know it, it's not just the fish. I'm also just going to eat the pasta. I'm also just going to do that before. It is a slippery slope. But that brings to the second thing that the Rebbe says about this verse, which is very, very powerful, and it applies more specifically, not just to your average Jew, but to people that are in a position of teaching Torah and influencing others to serve Hashem, which I'm included in that, and that's why it's very meaningful, but also very demanding, because there's a very interesting teaching from the Shalah. Rabbi Yeshaya Levi Horowitz, Chavi's great grandfather, who was the author of the Shalah, a beautiful commentary, a mystical commentary on the Torah and Jewish holidays, a fascinating set of Sfarim. He was I want to say 17th century, but I may be off a little bit, maybe 18th century. I'm blanking a little bit, but the Shalah is beautiful commentary. And what he says on this verse about creating the guardrail, he says, make a guardrail for your roof. He says, I found a homiletical explanation for it. He says, a roof is very, very high. That's the definition of a roof. It's the top part of a building. It represents arrogance, right? So it's the top of the building. It's rising to the top. It represents arrogance. And if you don't rein in your arrogance, that's going to bring you down. And what is he referring to? So Shalah was talking about in general. Shalah was talking in general. You have to make sure not to become an arrogant SOB, not to become a haughty, self-aggrandizing, self-centered egomaniac. We have enough of those in Washington. We don't need Jews to run around being egomaniacs. But the Rebbe takes what the Shalah teaches and says that this is specific to those who spend their lives teaching Torah and spreading Judaism. Why? So what does it mean, kisivne bayis chadash, when you're building a new home? What kind of home? So the Rebbe says you're building a home for God. You're building a Chabad house, you're building a shul, you're building a community. You're trying to infuse the world with the light of Hashem and try to bring Jews closer to their Father in heaven. You have to make sure that you have boundaries. You have to make sure that you have guardrails, that you, the person who's teaching the Torah, the person who's trying to inspire other Jews, doesn't become arrogant about their role. We've spoken about in this community about the rabbis historically, especially in the 50s and 60s, and maybe even into the 70s, who would look down at their congregants. They consider themselves over here, and the congregants are those lowly creatures that are down there. And this big, fancy, important, genius rabbi, I'm going to teach those lowly creatures what I know, the brilliance of Torah that I have. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because arrogance never works. But it's also arrogance clothed, right? It's a wolf with sheep's skin. The arrogance clothed in spirituality is the worst of the worst, because people see right through it. Look at how much talk there is today about hypocrites in religious garb, whether it's in non-Jewish denominations or in Jewish denominations. People have an expectation that the person teaching them Torah, that the person trying to bring them closer to God, doesn't make it all about themselves. They make it about God. You're God's salesman. You're not second to God. You're just a salesman. And so the Rebbe if the Rebbe is saying it, I feel almost like the Rebbe was talking to his own shluchim. He didn't say those words, but it's almost like he's saying, guys, don't forget, don't lose the plot. This isn't about your title. This isn't about your career. This isn't about your agenda. This isn't what's going to be written in the obituary after you die. This is about bringing souls closer to God. And if it's about bringing souls closer to God, then it's always about God. And if you don't protect yourself against that arrogance when you're trying to serve God, it will have, not only will it not affect positively the people you're trying to talk to, it will have a negative effect, because they will detect in 5 seconds that this has nothing to do with God. This is all about some rabbi or rebbitzin or world-renowned lecturer who's trying to create their own career off of God. And so that's why the pasuk says, the verse says, Ki yipal hanoifel mimenu. The person was already falling. Because the minute you're in a position of leadership, you're already in a situation where there's the potential for the arrogance to take over. And it's not like you have a choice in the matter. By default, being in a position of leadership means you're going to feel like a leader. Now, you could feel like a leader and be humble that you were chosen to be a leader, but naturally, leadership is power or some level of power or influence, and it's very, very dangerous. So the Torah is telling you, you got to be aware immediately if you're in a position of power. If you're in a position of leadership, you can either have the greatest influence, right? The famous difference between power and influence. You know, dictators have power and no one likes them. Someone like the Rebbe had zero power. The Rebbe of blessed memory had no power. He couldn't control anyone, but he had influence. And when you have influence, it lasts way way after you're gone, way after you pass away. Influence and power are not the same. They're the exact opposite of each other. So if you see your leadership role as being in service of the Jewish people, in service of God, and bringing people closer to Hashem, you will have incredible success, because the people you are talking to will see God through you. But if all they see is you and you and you and you, and there's no humility, and there's no, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, and there's no, I'm just a conduit for God to work through me, then all they see is an arrogant individual before them. And so it's the importance of every leader, especially spiritual leader, and especially those who are trying to bring other Jews closer to Hashem. There are till today, there are wonderful outreach Jewish organizations, but their foundation, the way they train their experts, their outreach experts, whatever that means, is to see the people that they're bringing closer to Hashem as the underlings. There's them, there's us, and we get to bring those people, those lowly people, these are children of Hashem. And you're not that much better. It's just that Hashem chose you to be in that leadership position. So have some humility and create the proper boundaries, the guardrails, so you don't become that arrogant creature, which we know Hashem never approves of. And it's important for leaders to read that, because we live in an era where, obviously, in the political arena for sure, but even in the spiritual arena, there are, how do you say this without throwing out people under the bus? There's miracle, there's so-called rabbis who do miracles, and they have their own Facebook page to advertise their miracles. I'm like, I think you missed something here. You created a Facebook page to advertise your miracles. I think there's something. I think like that's called arrogant. I don't think that's a trait that we as Jews, right? We have the kids used to listen to, still do sometimes, to tapes that we grew up with called Dr. Mitos. It's great tapes. If you ever want to hear Dr. Mitos, it's one of the best things in the world. You learn about basic menschlichkeit, how to be a decent human being. And one of the songs is, "Hey there, Mr. Show Off, you think what was it called? You think you're really great? But listen, Mr. Show Off," and it's a whole song, and it's ingrained in you as a child. That hold on, showing off, being arrogant, talking about, right? I told you the famous story with the young man and woman who go on a date, and the guy gets in the car and he talks about himself for 3 hours. He spends 3 hours talking about himself. Then he turns to the girl, because the coach told him he has to hear what the girl says too. So he turns to the girl and says, "Now I'm done talking about myself. What do you think about me?" You know what I mean? That behavior is not good for your marriage, and it's not good for life in general. And so the Torah is forewarning us that in life, it's important to step back in all aspects of life, marriage, leadership, physical homes, and ask yourself, what are your guardrails? How are you protecting to make sure you don't end up doing, saying, and acting in a way that is the antithesis of what godliness is, even though you're putting it in the clothing, in sheep's clothing, to make it sound holy. Because no everyone sees right through it. I mean, I know for myself, if I start listening to a speaker and in 5 seconds I realize that this is going to be a program where all they're talking about is themselves, I'm out. But if they start talking and I feel like Hashem is talking through them, I could listen to them for 7 hours. Sometimes I could turn on Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. Not every talk, but sometimes I'll turn on one of his talks and I literally can't turn it off, and I can go for 6 hours. And I'll catch up every time I have a second. Why? Because I could hear Hashem, Chassidus flowing through him. And I think it's one of the reasons Chavi's podcasts and classes are so successful, because most people who have podcasts, they like talking about themselves a lot. And they very rarely do you hear someone talk about what they don't know and what they've learned and what they're trying to learn and what they're succeeding at, but also what they're failing at. There's an honesty and an integrity and authenticity that is necessary in our lives that comes by creating guardrails, of not allowing ourselves to become full of ourselves. Someone asked me yesterday, Monday, while I was traveling, to call someone and ask them why they didn't want their daughter to date this guy's son. Two Chabad families, they were interested in dating the girl, and they wanted to know why they said no. So I called. And one of the things the mother of the girl said to me was, they heard that the boy takes himself seriously, takes himself too seriously, and my daughter's not interested in dating someone who takes himself too seriously. And I got a good laugh out of that. Because what that really is saying is that a guy takes himself too seriously, there's a little dose of arrogance there. Who do you think you are? Take a deep breath, take a chill pill. And it's so, so important that we put that guardrail up in a world where, not just in the Jewish world, but in general, there is so much gaiva. Right? Half all these political fights in our country because everyone thinks they're 1,000% right. God forbid the other team should have anything right. You can't say the other side has one idea that's a good one, because that's arrogance. Arrogance is, in Hashem's eyes, something that we don't welcome, we're not interested in. And so let us protect ourselves, let us protect our homes, let us protect our marriages by creating foundations that are unbreakable, but foundations that are based on integrity and authenticity, not on selfishness and worse than that, total arrogance, where it's not about Hashem and it's not about Torah and it's not about relationships. It's all about you, and only you. And with that, it would be actually a great way to prepare ourselves for Rosh Hashanah. Where what's today? Tomorrow, this Friday will be 3 weeks. That's crazy. This Friday night will be 3 weeks from Rosh Hashanah. That we prepare ourselves. No greater way to prepare for Rosh Hashanah than some self-accounting and asking ourselves how much of what we do is about feeding our ego and how much of what we do is about serving our Creator. And if we get to the conclusion that we're slowly moving closer to serving our Creator more than we feed our ego, then we're doing great. And it's a great way to start off the new year. Again, it's good to see everyone back. I'm still very much jet lagged. I've been up since midnight. But God willing, by Shabbos, I should be fully functional again. So maybe we'll have a sermon that has more energy to it. But in the meantime, good to see everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you back here soon. Sei gesund. Oh, and Manny has something to say. Very good. Hello. Have a wonderful week.